Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Netherlands and welcome to Rotterdam. And above all, welcome to Adaptation Futures. With 1,700 participants from 95 countries, this is the biggest climate adaptation conference ever held. And the presence of so many here says a lot about the urgency of climate adaptation. We need to adapt to a changing world, even if we succeed in reducing CO2 emissions to a minimum. But what will we be adapting to? What's the new normal? Which future issues will we face? There are still many questions crying out for answers. And the tremendous turnout today also shows that the issues affect us. Whether it's through water or food, energy or biodiversity, climate change is going to impact our economic development and our quality of life as a whole. And those effects will trickle through every society and every economy. From a rice farmer in Bangladesh who sees the water in the enormous delta rising even higher, to the young mother in Sao Paulo, where drought means that less and less water is available for more than 20 million people. But responding to big changes is not the greatest challenge we face. Of course, we must respond, but it's even more important that we stay a step ahead of the future. Our challenge is to prevent disasters. Our goal is to make people and their societies and economies resilient. That will save people's lives and will be a sound economic investment. Because for every dollar we spend on prevention, we save $7 of disaster relief. And building global resilience is certainly a major task. And we must do so with climate change all the while making its mark. But fortunately, adaptation is now higher on the global agenda than ever, thanks to the Paris Climate Agreement. And now we need to turn that urgency into results. It's time for action. That means we need to achieve visible results at this conference with new knowledge and new ideas. And this will only work if experts can meet and share what they know. But that's just one side of the coin. We will make even more progress if we bring together thinkers and doers. If we give trailblazers the space they need to set to work using all the knowledge available. And ideas and innovations don't come from nowhere. Governments can't buy them with subsidies, and markets just can't pull them out of thin air either. We need to do careful research, even if it takes some years. And at the same time, thinkers and doers need to be working out the next steps. We can foster this process by creating living labs, projects where research centers and companies team up to look for practical solutions, and above all, to make mistakes. To some, that might sound like a paradox, but it's exactly what history's biggest thinkers and doers did. And it's how progress is still made every day. And I'd like to give you two very different examples. And the first is a floating wooden school in Lagos, Nigeria. It drifts around in the middle of Makoko, a slum village built entirely on stilts in the middle of a lagoon. And Makoko is a place without infrastructure, without roads, and without even land. Yet almost 100,000 people living there. And 3 years ago, this school was the first cautious answer to the question, how will these vulnerable places survive an uncertain future? It was an experiment, but it has proved great success. And the floating structure adapts to the tidal changes and varying water levels of the lagoon, making it invulnerable to flooding and storm surges. And the new school provides an education for more than 100 children. But it's more than that. It's a place where people from all over Makoko meet. And it's an inspiration, because the school's design can be copied to build new and stronger houses in the vulnerable lagoon. And Makoko's floating school is an excellent example of a simple and cheap solution that has had a great positive impact on the local community. It's climate resilience in practice, on a small scale, but with a big impact. And my second example is the man you may know as the inventor of the Segway. His name is Kamoun. And all his life he has been fascinated by great scientists like Archimedes and Einstein, and by the question, what problem can I help to solve today? And at a young age he invented a portable dialysis machine for home use. A great a great advance in medical technology. And by inventing the Segway, he found a way of making urban traffic quieter and cleaner. And recently, Kamoun and his team have been working on the slingshot. And the slingshot is a water purification device the size of a small refrigerator. And the aim of a slingshot is to make clean water available and affordable to everyone on Earth. And that would be an enormous achievement, especially in times of climate change. And whether he succeeds or not, Kamoun is a textbook example of someone who takes a practical approach to complex issues. Someone who combines a great love of science with the restlessness of an entrepreneur. And he sinks his teeth into a problem and he doesn't let go until he has made the world a little better. And I'm sure many of you have come to Rotterdam with the same attitude. Just like the residents of Makoko and the people like Kamoun, you can also do something every day to make the world a better place, a more pleasant place. So I'm keen to do the same. Today and tomorrow in Rotterdam, I will be speaking to experts and fellow ministers about preventing water disasters and making vulnerable areas more resilient. And many of these areas are in low-lying urban river deltas. The Netherlands is a good example. And that's exactly why we have launched an international Delta Coalition, a coalition of countries that face the same issues and so are well suited to help each other. The Delta Coalition will meet for the first time here at the Adaptation Future Conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased that the Netherlands, and Rotterdam in particular, can make a small contribution to solving these global issues. Not only as a host of this conference, but also because we in the Netherlands urgently need your knowledge and need your solutions. The lowest point in the Netherlands is only 12 kilometers away, and it lies almost 7 meters below sea level. And with 17 million inhabitants and a world-class economy to protect, the Netherlands has first-hand experience of the effect of rising sea levels and erratic weather patterns. Our future can benefit from your solutions. So I hope that during this conference you will learn something about our country and our challenges, but also about the way we've learned to live and work with them. Because I want my country, with all its experience, to also help other countries in turn. Noblesse oblige. And I hope that seeing our country and meeting so many other stakeholders will mean you return home with new insights and new answers, and that we are all inspired to step one step ahead of the future. We mustn't settle for anything less. This is important for us today and in the future. And I wish you a very good day today, tomorrow, and thank you very much for coming here to Rotterdam. Thank you.
Minister Schultz van Haegen, Minister Al-Haiti, Executive Secretary Figueres, Executive Director Thiaw, Director Pulwarti, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends from all over the world. On behalf of the European Commission, I would like to welcome you here in Rotterdam to Adaptation Futures 2016. You have traveled from all over the world to share your practices and solutions with all of us. As European Commission, we are honored to host this conference together with the Dutch government and Provia. The Netherlands are well known for adapting for centuries to a very complex hydrological situation. And in the next days, our Dutch hosts will certainly present us many examples of climate change adaptation practices. And Provia, as we all know, represents the global research community with all its scientific power to answer the burning questions of how to respond to climate change through effective adaptation. In November last year, the United Nations estimated that storms, floods, heat waves and drought cost the global economy between 250 billion and 300 billion each year. And their occurrence had increased 3 times worldwide between 1980 and 2014. Ongoing European-funded research shows that under a 4-degree scenario, flood losses in the European Union may increase the current annual cost of 5 billion to 40 billion per year by 2050. And we have already, as we all know, paid a heavy price of 12 billion for the 2013 European floods. Sea levels will carry on rising for centuries to come and may rise by more than 1 meter this century alone. It is estimated that storm surges, floods and hurricanes could be costing the world 1 trillion a year by 2050, affecting over 136 major ports with more than 1 million inhabitants each. Climate change is already the cause of hunger and malnutrition for millions of people, and globally it might drive arable land coverage decline by 20% by the end of the century, even in a 2-degree world if no measures are taken. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the business case for mitigation and adaptation could not be clearer. This is the first major climate conference following COP21 in Paris last December. The Paris Agreement has given a clear and ambitious direction to fight climate change. Carbon emissions have to be drastically cut, and this has to start now. The transition to a low-carbon, resource-efficient, climate-resilient economy demands a fundamental shift in technology, energy, economics, finance, and ultimately in our society as a whole. We are in urgent need of solutions to make this shift happen. The Paris Agreement recognizes as well that research, science, and innovation are essential components for developing the solutions for this shift. And the European Union, as you all know, is committed to responding to this challenge. Through Horizon 2020, the world's largest research and innovation funding program, we are investing some 25 billion on climate-related actions in the period up to 2020. And Horizon 2020 is open to the world. So we call upon the best brains, the best innovators and scientists to join in. In the wake of the Paris Agreement, global research and innovation are needed on both mitigation and adaptation. On mitigation, there is a need to support all nations in the combined goal to keep global average temperature well below 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels, and to make efforts to keep it closer to 1.5 degrees. And on adaptation, we should be well aware that we will always need to adapt to a changing climate, even if we are successful in cutting emissions and in keeping this planet within less dangerous temperatures. The consequences of the greenhouse gases emitted and accumulated in the atmosphere in the last 250 years will continue to impact on the Earth for centuries, and therefore we have to adapt. Across the globe, there are many great and innovative solutions, both on mitigation and on adaptation. It is important that we share these solutions and deploy them. And this requires partnerships between researchers, innovators, businesses, and administrations. And this is what we would like to underline at this conference. In the next 3 days, we will have the opportunity to start new adaptation partnerships. The European Union is committed to making Europe the most climate-friendly region in the world. We have designed various policies and investment plans to act towards this objective in Europe. We are aware that climate change is a global challenge, but adaptation requires local solutions. And this is why, and many of you are familiar with that, the European Union has established the Global Climate Change Alliance nearly 10 years ago as a fast-track funding vehicle that by 2020 will distribute over 600 million euro in adaptation projects in less developed countries and small island development states. And this is why we support the conference today through Horizon 2020 as a platform to share practices and solutions, to move from global knowledge to local actions. Ladies and gentlemen, you represent more than 100 countries. You all have a story to share from your home country, from your home community, and from your network. I dare say that this conference program is based on your ideas, and we truly welcome them. One final word regarding the important role and work of the journalists of the Earth Journalist Network that will share your practices and solutions with those parts of the world that could not make it to Rotterdam today. And for that reason, I'm grateful to these journalists. I'm also grateful to all those people that were involved in preparing this conference and wish all of us an inspiring 3 days here in Rotterdam. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, that's a beautiful room. I just landed this morning, so short of coffee, I had to take some water. Minister Schultz, Director General Smits, dear Christiana, all protocol observed, as we say in Africa. I want to start by thanking all of you, the government of the Netherlands and the European Commission, for hosting this event with Provia. I also would like to thank our colleagues from the WMO and UNESCO for working with us to create Provia, the global program of research on climate change, vulnerability, impacts, and adaptation, back in 2011. That foresight, the support from member states and partners, and the subsequent hard work by Provia community has been critical in putting climate change adaptation on par with mitigation efforts, in making the transition from awareness to strategic planning and action, and in enabling the nearly 200 countries to engage with the historic Paris Agreement which was signed last month, or actually in New York. Christiana, congratulations again. Never before a treaty was signed by so many countries. And everybody who was in New York could see the excitement of all of these countries, over 175 countries that came to sign. It is clear that with this agreement, there is an ever greater need to address knowledge gaps, to foster science, and develop practical tools. That is why we actively seek to improve Provia, to ensure that Provia is able to deliver in the coming years. We want to learn from you, the adaptation community, how this can be done. Let us now work together and think and participate in the Provia session tomorrow, Wednesday. You are all invited. However, some of the terminology is so overused, it can be meaningless. Even the word adaptation can mean all things to all people. It could be adapting health requirements, infrastructure, or legal frameworks. So it is important to remember that every discussion in a conference room like this must come back to using science for solution in the real world today. For example, in the Panchayat region of Nepal, villages, agriculture, and the biodiversity-rich forests are all being hit by rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, drying water sources, and a growing number of landslides. While disappearing livelihoods are taking young people with them away from the mountains. But residents working with UNEP, UNDP, IUCN, and other partners, as well as the government and civil society organizations, are benefiting from ecosystem-based adaptation measures. The message is clear. we need to work with nature. We need to use nature-based solutions. That has been also observed in the Andes in Peru and Mount Elgon in Uganda, where we are already gathering more knowledge and sharing the benefits even further. But adaptation is not a developing nation problem. Take the Netherlands as an example. This country has been adapting, planning, and changing their requirements based on changing conditions. It is an issue that should be addressed by all nations. So there's that false impression that adaptation is for the poor only. Of course they are more vulnerable. Of course they need to adapt, but everybody else needs to adapt as well. You may have seen last week's New York Times story on the United States' first climate refugee. This article makes the point that moving this small community of 60 people in Louisiana creates massive challenges and costs nearly $50 million, 60 people. But the bigger point for us is how do we plan to address the issue when that figure of affected people comes to 1,000 or 1 million people? That is why adaptation features and the United Nations Environmental Assembly, which is going to be held in less than 2 weeks from now, and you are all invited. Minister, you are all invited there. And I know the Netherlands is the current chair of the EU, so we hope to have a big delegation from not only the Netherlands, but from all countries from all over the world. And let me just open some parentheses to say that as of yesterday, we had 120 ministers already registered. So if you have not done so, please consider. So that is why adaptation features and the United Nations Environmental Assembly must ensure that our efforts in adapting to climate change are fast, agile, and relevant to every country and every community. Adaptation is a process of adjustments based on interventions that either use the benefits of climate change, where there is some, or seek to avoid the harm, where there is many. The losses and damages can occur from a spectrum of climate change impacts, ranging from sudden onset events such as cyclones, hurricanes, flash floods, and landslides, to slow onset processes such as increasing average temperatures, sea level rise, drought, salinization, and ocean acidification. When adaptation measures are associated with tangible assets, such as roads, infrastructure, the task of recovery, whilst challenging, can be relatively straightforward. But the loss and damage associated with abandonment of territory, loss of cultural heritage, biodiversity, ecosystems is much harder to deal with. Therefore, developing a full understanding of the serious implications of losses and damages is what is needed to motivate policymakers, governments, communities to take action. So first, we need to better understand the scope, scale, and speed of the efforts required. The scientific, political, and financial communities working with Provia and UNEP are instrumental in understanding gaps in our knowledge and developing guidance to ensure policymaking remains both responsive and rooted in the latest evidence. For example, using common metrics to measure country-level impacts of climate change will assess gaps in national, regional, and global adaptation and monitor progress in implementing adaptation measures, which will, in turn, support national adaptation plans and indicate where the international community needs to step in. However, we also need to understand the gaps in the resources to tackle all of these efforts. That is why today we are launching the Adaptation Finance Gap Report, which sheds more light on the gap between the finance currently available to adapt to climate change and the finance needed to meet our commitments. The report clearly demonstrates that even if, and there's a big if, even if we succeed in limiting temperature rise to 2 degrees, between 2020 and 2030, adaptation to climate change could cost up to $300 billion per year. Yet, the amount of public finance currently available is closer to $25 billion as of 2014. The figures speak for themselves. Public funding alone will not be enough. So to close the gap, we clearly need a better understanding of the complementary roles that private finance and actions can play. We know that the UNEP's emissions gap report confirmed that not only we are not yet on track to get down to 2 degrees, but we really need to be aiming closer to 1.5 degrees. So the 275 billion gaps is just the start. Which brings me to the second point. Once we better understand the scope, scale, and speed of the efforts required, we have to actually do it. Currently, we are not starting from scratch. There is solid commitment among stakeholders already working to build climate resilience, including national governments and NGOs, city authorities and local communities, the private sector, and civil society. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, because together we must scale up our ambition and our impact. Because as the emissions gap report shows, the gap can be closed using existing options, such as forest-related mitigations, renewables, and energy efficiency. In fact, we have already seen how preparing for the Paris Agreement encouraged the development of national climate policies and a shift towards low-carbon economies. Likewise, look at the Sendai framework, which focuses on understanding all aspects of disaster risk and the options to reduce it, strengthen partnerships and governance to manage it, increasing public and private investment to increase economic, social, health, and cultural resilience to living with it, and actively preparing to build back better if and when we are hit by it. In conclusion, it's a great reminder that the right combination of science, policy, partnerships, and action is a powerful force for change. And that sweet spot is where UNEP and Provia belong. So let me just end by asking you to use this conference to share your own thoughts, experience, and ideas, to engage with the 4 young scientists here from the Provia Fellowship. And I would like to ask them to please stand up. The 4 fellows from Provia. Congratulations. The task is huge, but the rewards are bigger. I thank you.